Okay, welcome back to our punch window video series. This is the second video. The first video was on the design phase. This video is on the tender phase. So we will cover, the goal of this video is to cover a few key things to look for while tendering your punch windows. The first thing to consider, and probably one of the most important things, is vet your suppliers. It is really important, and I'll just kind of put this on a list over here. So how do you do this? It's not rocket science. It's quite simple. Just go find other people in the company, talk to people who've used each of the suppliers on your bid list, and ask them, how is their experience? And I'll sort of put these points on the list as I go. So go find someone who's used them before and talk to them. If you can't find someone who's used them before, talk to Construction Science. They're out there, they're in suppliers' plans every day, so they know a lot of the main suppliers in the market. You really want to talk to them about a couple things, but I mean, the first thing is, from a technical standpoint, are they even capable of doing your project? Do you have complex windows? Is it a strange glass supply? Would there be anything that prevents that subcontractor from actually being able to produce the windows you're asking them for? The other thing is, what's their workmanship like? What's their field team like? Have we had a bunch of callbacks on projects that they did for us in the past? And why? So the next part of this video is on scope of work. So these are a few things to consider when you're putting together the scopes for punch window and adjacent trades, sort of best practices. So the first thing is air vapor barrier membrane, so AVB. And the important thing here is that, and we sort of touched on this in video number 1, is that you don't always know who will go first and who will go second, so it's best practice to include AVB transitions in both the punch window scope of work and any adjacent envelope work. So for the detail we're looking at, you'd have a flap from the punch window and the flap from the metal cladding. And if you include both and something changes down the road and the sequence changes, you'll still be okay. So buy it from both sides. The next thing is flashing. Similar to the AVB, it's a good practice to include flashing in both scopes of work. So if there's a punch window adjacent to another construction type, make sure that you include flashing in both of those scopes of work. In this detail, it's actually quite simple, but sometimes it's not quite clear who would provide the flashing depending on the sequence of work. So who goes first, who goes second. So if you buy it in both scopes and things change down the road, you're always safe. The next point is anchor. So anchor. In some situations, you're not able to anchor your punch window directly back to your base structure. So in these situations, sometimes you need an HSS or an angle to sort of bridge that gap between your punch window and the structure. So it's important to identify these areas and make sure that you include this secondary structure in the scope of work. So whether that is in your miscellaneous metal scope or in the punch window scope is up to you, but we need to make sure we identify the secondary structure that may be required. There we go. Similarly, is if a punch window is sitting on top of a stud knee wall, it's important to remember that now the load of your punch window is being transferred into that stud wall, so it needs to be designed for that load. It can't just be a regular stud wall. Okay, so the next thing and the final thing is mock-ups and testing. So I'll add that to the list here. Mock-ups and testing. So sometimes mock-ups and performance testing of your punch windows is included in the specs, and in which case, obviously, you have to include that in the scope of work. Other times, it's not. And depending on the project and the client and the complexity, it may be worthwhile to include performance testing in the scope of work anyways. It's most definitely worthwhile including in situ mock-ups in the scope of work, whether it's in the specifications or not. So yeah,